I was asked to say something about rest for you in this renewal week where you stop and pause and reflect together. And so as I started thinking about it, I was really troubled. What do we mean by rest? What does that look like? I'm not sure what your world is like just now, but I know that there's often a struggle to rest, that we're full, busy, frenetic sometimes, that there's class upon class or activity upon activity, that there's meeting after meeting, that every minute of every day could be absorbed into life's urgency. And so what does it mean then to be a people who are called by God to stop, to have Sabbath, to rest occasionally? I don't know if you've ever had the experience of sitting with somebody who's a person of peace. Somehow it oozes out of them. They're the kind of person who makes you feel good about yourself. They have time for you. They stop and pause. They listen well. They're attentive. How do you become that kind of restful presence? How do you become somebody who shines with Christ-likeness, who honors the other? How do you become somebody so attuned to God's heart that you can lean into the world full of grace and compassion and mercy? I think I'd argue that for all of us today, rest is somehow part of the answer to that question. How do we become whole? How do we understand that we're enough? How do we understand that we're people who are graced, full of peace and truth? So as I was thinking about that, I began to kind of pick apart at the places where I think we see rest in scriptures, or where we hear advisories to rest. There at the beginning of creation, of course, when God's done this amazing job of flinging stars out and of crafting space and time, when God's parted water from land and cultivated and created beautiful animals of all varieties, when God has created humankind, when all of that is very good, God says now, rest. God rests. So as we tiptoe through scripture, we discover that in the commands there's this Sabbath-keeping notion. There's this idea that to be truly a people of God, at some point you have to stop so that you can reset yourself, so that you can gather in your scattered senses, so that you can be tuned differently to God's provision, so that you can trust God again. Or if we go into the Psalms, we discover that in times of real trouble, in times of real anxiety and circumstances that come upon us, when enemies are everywhere, when curses are thrown at you, the people of God are somehow called to direct their attention to God so that they can know who they are. And some of that involves stopping, worshipping, resting, being. When we come to the New Testament, this covenant that shapes our lives, we see Jesus. And we see that sometimes he sets boundaries on his living. He rushes off to the hills to find peace and space. But we see him not rigid in that, so he eats ears of grain on a Sabbath day. What's going on with the patterns of our life? Who are we called to be? How are we to be restful? When we keep with Jesus for a little while, we discover that he says things like this: don't worry about yourself. Lilies, fields, sparrows. Or he says things like this: give me your burdens. I share them, I shape you, I'm yoked with you, I'm leading you, I'm teaching you who you are. So when I'm thinking about all of these things and this craving, this deep desire to embody what it means to be a Christ-like follower, a person of rest and peace and hope, it seems to me that there are some prescriptions, if you like, or maybe it's descriptions, I'm not sure. Things like this: when we're called to rest, we're called to rest in grace. You are enough. You are enough. When we're called to rest, we're called to rest in God's rockety rockness. I don't know, I was trying to think of how you build on the idea of rock, but this is the rock that is so solid, that goes all the way down, that when we plant our feet and stop and feel through the soles of our feet to the crown of our head what we're resting on, we discover that we can be earthed, grounded, we can find rest. Or then I was thinking about the quite literal way of rest. rest in sleep. College students aren't notorious for sleeping a lot. Sometimes we spend our lives just going along with all kinds of activities, cultivating friendships, which are hugely important. In Manchester right now, a lot of students are known for all-night things. In fact, COVID-positive parties are a thing, believe it or not. But when I was thinking about what it means to truly rest, and I was thinking about sleep, breathing deeply, sleeping peacefully, the kind of sleep that's nurturing of your being, where you wake up the next day refreshed and ready to go. Or then I was thinking about resting in a shared yoke. That sounds a bit odd in our days, I think. But somehow or other, getting ourselves into this space where we realize that it's not all on us, that our shoulders aren't carrying the loads alone, that somehow we're in a community of grace that shares with us the burdens of our lives. There's rest in that. Or then there's actual rest in real life, by which I mean stopping, I suppose. Shutting off your virtual worlds, discovering your body again, reminding yourself of how good it is to fill your lungs with fresh air. If you're in Point Loma itself, you've got this amazing campus with this view of the sea when the fog goes away. Oh my goodness, breathing deeply and soaking in beauty. But some of you don't live there, of course. You're scattered all over the place watching this. How do you find rest in creation? Rest in the beauty? How do you see the stars or look at the sun? How do you spot the weeds in the cracks of the pavement around you? How do you begin to rest in real life, in time and space? How do you get outside and reconnect with God in joy? Above all of these ways of rest, I think resting is really about cultivating closeness to God, about breathing God's self, about exhaling God's self. Resting as cultivating closeness to God through plowing into scriptures and learning them. There's this Teze chant that goes, "In God alone, my soul shall find its rest." I think something like that helps us cultivate an idea, an attitude, and a hope of rest. The kind of rest that restores us and enables us to carry on, even in difficult times. God be with you as you stop, rest, breathe.
We're glad you were able to join us for this invitation into rest. For further resources, we invite you to check out our care package for renewal and rest. You can access that through your Canvas student account or find the Google site in the description below.